right, now at this point in your story, we have gotten you to kind of the last stages of the war in Europe. Now mostly you're picking up and moving. So basically, how are you spending your days there, February, March of 45, as you're going forward? What's happening?
Well, from when I joined them in the 10th of January until 1st of February, we were pretty much on the move. I was on the road a lot of times because I had to go back to, and it was quite a ways back to headquarters. They were staying put and we were moving, so sometimes it was 20 or 30 miles to go to 106 headquarters. And so I would take people for the dentist and one thing and another. It was pretty routine stuff, but I was on the road most of the time, put a lot of miles on that Jeep. And when I was in the area, while we would we didn't, I don't remember that anybody had any cards to play or anything. We just visited with each other, I guess, and walked around, and I wasn't there, so I was on the road all the time.
Right.
I was on the road all the time. My day was cut out for me by whatever they told me to do. And so my situation was a little different. I got to know the area real well. I like the back of my hand in there most of the time in there. We did have a couple of incidents that were, they had, for morale purposes, they tried real hard to get us good food whenever they could get their hands on it and one thing or another. And for instance, we hadn't weren't able to take a shower or bath, and for a month. And they got a special truck, the engineers got a special truck, pulled up on the roadside. I don't remember what area we were in at the time, but then they took us all in, and the water wasn't hot, but it was heated, and stood out there in the cold and took a shower anyway, and showers felt pretty good. And then at one point they, that was after we left 82nd, I think, we had a chance to go into Spa. I mean, you know, Spa's a posh place, and neither the Germans or anybody else ever touched Spa because they wanted to use it for their own entertainment when they got there. We went into this beautiful, sort of like palaces actually, the hot tub places there, the natural springs. And those tubs have a bottom that drops out of them, and the mineral waters or whatever they are float in from the outside, and they pull the hose, not a drain, but it's just, I don't know how it works mechanically. So they get us in there, here's this scruffy bunch, we haven't shaved, we haven't done anything, and they put us in, we take off all our clothes, they take our clothes, they give us fresh clothes to put on after we get out, run us into these huge bathing areas, and there are these Belgian women all ready to rub you down and put you in the tub like a kid and scrub you up and give you a towel and send you back out. That was pretty entertaining. Yeah. But that was, he never got the credit for it, but I found out later that he was the one that was doing it. We had an officer at Division Artillery Headquarters. His name was Ben Hagman. Have you heard of him? Well, Larry Hagman's father.
Oh, okay.
He was married to Mary
Martin?
Martin.
Yeah.
Teenage type of thing. She was upset because her folks sent her out to her girls' school in Tennessee when they were in Texas, and she called him up and had him come up there and get married against her parents' wishes and against his better judgment, I guess. But they were separated. I don't think they were divorced at the time, but they were separated. And years later, I got to be real close friends with him through the association. Real nice guy. Anyway, he was officer in charge of plans and training and essentially morale. And so he got all these kind of things, and then they started, we draw lots for trips to Paris when we were in, this was in March, towards the tail end when we were just sitting tight and the fellows were clearing out the Siegfried line for the final breakthrough to the Rhine. And they weren't taking many, infantry wasn't even taking many, engineers were taking some. But, so we did get, we draw lots and did get, and whenever anybody went to Paris, they'd bring back drinks and one thing and another, and candies and one thing and another, and we'd all divide it up. And so most of the time it was pretty boring. Actually, the one place we had, when we first moved into the Bulge area, there was still quite a bit of activity in that area. We were back with them in 99th at that time, I can't remember. But all these divisions kept, we were staying put in our positions, and all these divisions coming through for the push to the Rhine would be temporarily assigned to us for, we were assigned to them for support. And so we got to see the 84th, the 75th, and I think, I don't think the 17th Airborne went through, I think that was just the, but of those two I remember, well, the 9th, we were with the 9th Division earlier. Anyway, so we were doing, and you couldn't do much, the mud was knee deep, but they had, the engineers had tried to build corduroy roads, put logs in, you know, and try to get gravel and stuff over there, but it was, you just couldn't go much of anywhere. But I was one of them that wanted to pass to Paris and, you know, for a weekend. And some of the others, I got a picture downstairs of a group of us that went. And while I was there, I met a French girl, and she corresponded with me for a while, which was nice. And Paris was another real nice town to me. We had, we arrived here, and Glenn Miller had been scheduled to be there at the time we were going to be there, and they had his name up on the marquee, but of course he never showed up. Well, we got to go to the Follies and the Paris Opera. The Louvre wasn't open, some of the places weren't open when we were there, but the USOs were real, they were great, just about everywhere, except Philadelphia. Except Philadelphia.
Right.
And what else was it, we did, well, a lot of the fellows had not, that was one of my routine jobs, almost at least once a week, take, they would call, pull up fellas' records for dental appointments. So I would take them, I was the bus back and forth to the dentist, and the dentist was 30 miles away. And the dentist and his assistant were a couple of real characters anyway. It was kind of fun to go back and visit with him. But yeah, we had things that they tried to do to keep us happy. And this one place that we got into in Bulge, when we first pulled in, the Germans had just, this was a couple of weeks before the crossed the Rhine. The Germans had just pulled out, and they were. There was a Christmas tree in the corner of the house. Furniture was all cleared out pretty well, but there was a Christmas tree in one corner of the house. And somebody was gonna take it down, and they had some little lights on it, one thing, and no electricity, but no lights. And we said, don't touch that, it may be booby, because they'd booby trapped the bodies. In this one town that we took over, the SS group had, you can see where they'd stolen the gold out of the teeth of the corpses, and had booby trapped the bodies. In order to clear some of the bodies out of the way, we'd have to put a rope around an ankle and drag it a little ways to make sure there wasn't a bomb underneath. It was not a real pleasant situation. But there was things like that we did. There wasn't much. You didn't get passes locally. You stayed away from the community people. You didn't get a chance to know. At least we didn't anyway. I didn't.
Did you get to sleep in houses and buildings, or were you outside, or?
No, we were, at that point, that was the one good thing about, I mean, it wasn't, that was the one thing different than Tennessee. We always in building, or what was left of buildings. And a couple of the, sometimes the fellows at the gun crews weren't at a building. I mean, they would take turns going back in the
Yeah.
shelter, but they weren't, of course, the guns were mounted outside the building, and they were firing all the time.
Okay. Now, did you go very far into Germany yourself, or did you leave the unit before that?
Well, we started in Germany. I mean, at the beginning, we were in Germany.
Right.
And we went back into that area, well, after, that wasn't until after after VE Day that I went very far into Germany. We were enough in so we got a battle star for the Rhineland and one thing and another, but we didn't have much in the way of activity there. It was just a few days at the end when they pushed off for the Rhine that we were in that area. After that, well, when VE Day was over, and we came back from France where we'd been sent down after the reactivation of the lost units. Why, we were training to go to Japan then, and we were in Germany, Mayenne, Germany area at that time we got there in May until July. Yeah.
Okay. What impressions did you have of Germany at that point, in terms of what it looked like, or whatever you saw of the people at that point?
Well, they're, I hate to say this, but they were more hospitable to us than the French. Maybe you've heard that before. I can't say that they were apologetic, but they let it be known that, they felt that they were in a situation that they couldn't do anything different than what they did. And they were much more, they and the Belgians, well, the Dutch too, everybody but the French, were as soon as the place was knocked down, they were right out there rebuilding it again and getting it back and clearing the roads and cleaning things up. And they did a real good job of that right away quick. They didn't ask for any help, and I guess later on we sent people in to help them, but to start with, they didn't help them at all. And then we had, on one occasion, it was around the 4th of July after VE Day that we had a thing called Operation Tally Ho, in which every unit that was close to a town, and most of them were in a town by that time, and buildings in the town, commandeering buildings in the town, starting at 4 o'clock in the morning, I think. We entered the villages and spread out and tried to hit all corners of the village at once on a raid to clear out any SS troopers or people that might, and show identification of where they were and what they were doing. And I could speak a little German, so I was sent with a special group. And at that time, the fellow I had driving for me grew up in Brooklyn with his grandparents who spoke only German, and so he was in real high demand. But on that, we didn't find anything in the town we were at, but we did accidentally uncover an undercover girl later on in the day, the next day. But the only thing I found with the group I was with was an old antique shotgun that had funny shells with a nipple on the end that was a firing pin. I never saw one like it before, and I think the fellow was going to cry if we confiscated that. And I just told the group that was with me, let's leave it here. He doesn't have any shells for it, and that's not anything we need to do. But that was about the only thing. We found a couple of flags, a couple of Nazi flags. And the people didn't fuss, I mean, they didn't throw their arms around us, but they didn't fuss. We visited with a couple of the ladies, a couple of the girls that could speak a little English. Of course, John didn't need any English. And this one German girl said, "I can't place your accent. Where are you from?" He said, "Brooklyn." But that's the only contact we had, and this was after VE Day even.
Okay. Now, at what point in this does the division get kind of put back together again?
April of '45, we were at Rennes, France, and had just reactivated officially with a big parade, mounting the 590th and the 589th and the 422 and 423, but they had us all out on the parade ground, and they brought out, they had rescued the artillery flags from the Germans at some point, and so they had those presented, one thing. But it was, the next day we got word that President Roosevelt had died, so I can't remember exact date, but you can tell by that. And we had a new commanding officer then, Major Wolfile, and he said, well, he just had word that Commander-in-Chief Roosevelt had died. He said, I'm not a politician, I don't know or want anything to do with politics. All I know is he's the Commander-in-Chief and we now have a new one. And he said, I understand this guy can't be all bad because in World War I he was in the artillery.
Now, was the rebuilt division, was that all new personnel, or had you gotten any of the prisoners back?
Taken care of us from the remaining residue,
Right.
and I was one of them that was taken from the 592nd, and so was Pratt, this officer that had survived the 590th. There were about 100, a little bit less than 100 of the whole battalion that were still left, and they divided us up and put us as a cadre and moved us up in rank and one thing and another, but then they filled us in with everything. Air Force personnel that no longer needed, engineers that were no longer needed, medical personnel from hospitals, emptied the stockade, sent those people to us for training. What a headache. Oh man, that was something else. And then they sent us away from the division, went back up to take care of the prisoners, the German prisoners, and those of us that went with the reconstituted unit went way down on the French coast to Saint Lazare and Lorient, where the Germans still had the U-boat sailing out of, and we're in just a holding pattern down there. We were sent down there to clean them out, and that war ended after we were down there for 4 days. I was at the front down there when the German surrender party came through. I got to see a historical event. For that was at Lorient. No, that was at Saint Lazare. We moved to Lorient then, and that's when we had our last. After the war ended, we had our last casualty. When the night that they were supposed to, we were never real sure when the VE Day came because the French were celebrating for a day or so before because they knew what was going to happen, and nobody told us anything. And the night after when the French were celebrating, I was at the aid station. We were in an orchard, a apple orchard in France, just south of Saint Lazare, and south and east of Saint Lazare, and this fellow was walking guard duty and came in. He said, "I wish you'd take a look at the back of my neck." He said, walking out there and in the dark, and he said, I felt something sting on the back of my neck, and it's kinda wet back there. So I took him in under the lantern and looked at him, and I said, well, you got a boat loan there, and the bullet was a spent bullet from somebody celebrating, I don't know, a mile away or whatever. It was a small caliber. It had entered the back of his neck, struck a facet of the vertebrae, and that was close to the surface, the spinous process probably, and it tunneled underneath the skin, left a little welt underneath the skin, and he'd come out almost to the front of his face. So I checked his, it wasn't bleeding much. I put on 2 Band-Aids, checked his record to see when he had his tetanus shot and one thing and another, and I said, well, you can go back to duty. I said, I'm not real sure if you'll get a Purple Heart. I said, I don't know what the regulations are after the war, after the war's ended, but I'll send in all the paperwork. So I'm sure he got one later, but I didn't have one.
And once that happened, did they start training you to go to Japan, or?
Yeah, we had, within a few days, they moved us out of there. They took us up. That's where I had my next set of casualties. See, I was sent down there as a NCO in charge of the metal detachment, and I was supposed to have a surgeon with me. Didn't have a surgeon for 4 months. I was responsible for everything for the 590th Artillery Battalion, for anything, and I had the biggest trouble because the French, we were close to the French for supplies, and they wouldn't give me anything. The 66th Division that had been down there since Christmas, because their ship got torpedoed off Cherbourg, and they kept them down there just to contain the Germans, and they were actually real friendly with the Germans. When we got down there, we were told that the only restrictions they had were that they had made a truce with the Germans, and they weren't going to shoot. Everybody could observe the others, apparently, or knew where, by patrols, they knew where they were. I mean, everybody patrolled back and forth at night. So we've got a guarantee out that if we won't shell their whorehouses, they won't shell our chow line. Other than that, anything's all right. So that was kind of a peculiar situation down there. And then when we had a real problem, I had a real problem, because when they liberated U-boat ports and the Germans surrendered, why, this Ben Hagman was on the team that went in to take over the supplies and guarantee that they stacked all our arms and one thing and another. And he saw to it that everyone in our battalion, I don't know about the 589th, they were down there with us, the 424 and the 423, or the 423 and the 422, I'm not sure whether they went down there. I think they sent another recently formed regiments down there. You'll have to check on that. I'm not, because I never saw them. I mean, I didn't even see the 589th when I got, but some of them were at St. Nazar and others were down at Moraine. Anyway, I had a real problem because I tried to find out where to evacuate wounded if I had them. And the French didn't want them, and the 66 were moving out. And their supply lines and everything were way back away from it. And so I was kind of lost. I did get some supplies from the 66, I think it was, because we were only down there a few days. And we got orders to move out. And but before that, when they got these supplies out of the U-boat stockpiles, they had everything. And they had booze for every country in the world. And Ben Hagman, he was later an alcoholic anyway, but at that point he wasn't. But he got a whole bunch of liquor supplies and turned them over for the fellas to sell it. We weren't, enlisted personnel weren't allowed to have any liquor. The officers had it all the time. And that was a mistake. I came back from trying to find a place to evacuate people to, and I had a bunch of drunks all over battling each other and sick and everything, because some of the booze wasn't that good. and they'd been drinking it by the pint instead of the glass, and so I had some more casualties to take care of, and when I got back that second time, things had quieted down, and we were in an orchard that the farmhouse for the orchard was not very far away from where I had my aid station. And I thought, well, I better go up and apologize to these people for all the problems that this has been. I'm thinking that. And I didn't know it at that time, but they had a Calvados still there. And it wasn't the Calvados season, but apparently he had some stuff stored in there. And I don't know whether you know what Calvados is, but anyway, you don't drink it unless you're too drunk to know what you're doing. And I wanted to keep the fellows away from that when I found out about it, so I was gonna go up and reassure him that I'd do everything we could to not bother that. And he was real surly and not very hospitable, and said, well, they better not disturb any of his property anymore than what it had been. The sooner we left, the better. Okay, so much for friendly handout, one thing or another. And when we left, why, we were stopped on the road, and the whole battalion had to go out in a field and line up. And the commanding officer, Major Wolfow, went down through all the ranks, and this fellow would stop in front of certain soldiers and watch them, and nobody knew what was going on. And then word got passed down that this fellow said that somebody had raped his daughter during the night. And he was sure it was it was from our battalion. Well, I knew my men were they could do anything at all, and I didn't think anybody else they were too new and too confused to pull anything like that. And sure enough, they went through the whole ranks and never did pull anybody out. But that's the only other incident we had in that location. But when we got on the way up to Lorient, why we got a real mix-up. It's a real long story, but I'll try to shorten it. The column of service battery, which I was with, got broken up because they had a fork in the road just before we got to the little town where we were going to be stationed, which was close to Lorient. I don't think I got Azar and Lorient mixed up anyway. And one of the kitchen truck and a couple other vehicles took a turn. The column got stretched out too far, and so then they didn't have a MP at the crossroads when we were moving. The war's over, see. So the kitchen truck and another truck of some kind took the wrong turn. Well, the battery commander, Lieutenant Ringer, took out after him because he had planned a special dinner. They'd gotten a hold of some steaks from somewhere, and they were going to have a celebration and have a big cookout dinner, and you know, usually the officers got that, but he got enough for the whole, supposedly for the whole battery. And he wanted that kitchen truck, so he went down, got them turned around and came back, and Lieutenant Pratt, who was was his executive officer, was left with the column, and he was stationed there at the crossroads directing people down the right path. And I had just passed the intersection. There was a big crater there, and you had to pull out and go around. And some of the trucks were having trouble because they'd told us that the shoulders were all mined and stay off in the shoulders. Well, and it was a blacktop road, and you could see some of the mines as you drove along the shoulder. So I didn't want to pull off the road. And I had passed there, and Ringer was coming back with the cook wagon from one side, and Pratt was at the corners, and just as the cook truck came there, before they passed the corners to make the right turn to go in the right direction, some ammo trucks from Service Battery were coming down, and they followed Pratt's directions to go down and I had just passed there. And the ammo truck right behind me hit a mine that was in the road. The French were supposed to have taken them out and cleared the road, but they hit the mine and blew up. And we had, I thought we had 2 casualties at first. There were so many pieces, and it turned out to be just one. But had several fellows burned trying to get everybody out of the truck. There were people riding on top of the ammo, and a fellow that got burned to death had caught fire and slid down under the tailgate where they couldn't get him out. And the ammo was exploding all over the place. Well, I missed out on that part because I had gone on ahead about 4 miles to where I was setting up the aid station, and all at once Major Wolfow came churning up on his Jeep. He said, "Get in your Jeep and come." He said, "Bring some burn ointment with you." He said, "We got some people that are burned." And so I went back with him. And by that time, the medic I had that was with that group, well, he had, with the explosion, he had lost his hearing. They blew out his eardrum, but then he had some shell fragments in his knee, I guess. But they knew where there was a hospital in that area, and they took him to the hospital before I got there. Well, Pratt was still there, and so I dressed his hands and one thing that were burned. And as it turned out, that was the father to this woman that's been working on all this information with the letters that she found that she's having me fill in the blanks on and that. And I didn't even remember, I knew who he was, but I didn't remember that he was one of the burn casualties. I hadn't remembered that. But she found out that that was true. And from there on, why, we went all the way back to Mayen, Germany. I don't remember, we made a fairly quick trip because we didn't have the half-tracks with us at that point. And it was really a pleasant ride through the, that area of France. It was a real nice ride. We went, and then we went back through Luxembourg City. That's a beautiful place. And fortunately, didn't have to be with 106. The rest of them who were having so many problems with taking care of POWs. They had a real mess. And we went on to train, and actually we're not far from the Nuremberg Ring, the big racetrack that was on TV the other day. I saw it there. It wasn't occupied. In fact, it looked pretty much in disrepair, but there was a hospital that was set up in the area when we first arrived, and they didn't have any patients anymore, and so they were fixing to move. But I did go up there for a visit to get some supplies once and get some signatures on medical forms. I had supposed to have a medical officer sign the forms because I wasn't a physician. And I had to turn in forms on narcotics and VD and sanitation, inspect the kitchens and one thing, other things that medical officer was supposed to sign. I had MD at the end of the report saying, and I hunted all over for a doctor to sign. And when that hospital moved out of there, I had nobody to sign them, so I signed them myself. And the General McMahon came around about a month later and said, I know how I was doing, and I said, well, I'm doing without a medical officer. And he said, yeah, I know, we're trying to find one for you. He said, what do you do for monthly reports? I said, well, I turn them in. He said, well, who signs them? I said, well, I do. And he said, well, you're not a doctor, you're not supposed to sign one, you're supposed to be signing. And he said, let me see one. And I showed it to him, and he said, well, see, he said, I didn't put MD after my name because that's at the end of the line, printed form. So it says MD there, you're not an MD. Well, I said, no, but I said, I thought that meant medical detachment. He got all red in the face, he said, I don't wanna hear about it. So that's the last I heard of that. He was a great buddy of mine in the association, and both he and General Jones, real fond of my family. The little kids at the reunion were always the stars of the game. But when we got back for training, we did have some casualties there. I didn't have them, but the infantry that was training with us, apparently some shells that were manufactured in the state when the Union was on strike didn't get done right, and shells fell short and injured some of our troops, which was, but I wasn't involved in that. And that was about all until, that's when they pulled us out of there just before the bombs were dropped. About a week, we left the training area and we're in bivouac and just killing time, and they sent John and I, because John spoke better German than anybody else, to get a huge barrel of beer, not a keg, but a barrel of beer. And once we got the beer and got it back, they found out that we didn't have a spigot for it. So sent us back into town, and of course, John didn't know the word for spigot, so we had to try to demonstrate everything we wanted, and the old German brewer said, oh, yeah. I said, what you got? What kind of beer you got? American or German? We said German. We thought he'd be thrilled. He said, German beer. Bosser. But we did get the spigot, and then, so we put it on the sawhorses out in front of the aid station tent. I guess Lieutenant Ringer thought I could keep better track of it than he could, and they didn't abuse it much. Everybody took their turn at it, but somebody had picked up this mongrel dog down in France, and it was a peculiar thing because its paws weren't real big, and it was obviously a year or two old, and it was still a puppy. It still looked like a puppy, and he wasn't worth much. He didn't bother anybody, but he'd hop in anywhere to go any place with him, and somehow he ended up with the medical detachment. And the fellows all called him or her Fraulein, and that dog they couldn't get the spigot to turn off completely. It would drip. That dog would lay under the spigot and lap up beer until he couldn't hardly move, and then she'd go off and sleep it off and then come back. And the other thing I remember about that is that we had tents all set up in a nice proper row, and it was kind of muddy, so Lieutenant Ringer got somebody to bring in some gravel stones to make paths for us around the tent area. We were only there for about 4 or 5 days. And somebody had resurrected a loudspeaker and a turntable for records. Only had one record, and that was One Meatball. I don't know whether you've ever heard the song One Meatball. It's a ridiculous song in the first place, and it's just repetition. One meatball, one meatball. So all day long, all you hear was one meatball, one meatball. That was entertainment. It was home. So I guess some of the fellas thought it was great anyway. And then we got to they pulled us out then because they knew that the war was going to end, and put us in the town of Brookshall down near Carlsruhe. And it was a nice, fair-sized, big town. And we got down there, and I got a physician assigned to me. But on the same day, I got word that if I wanted to go to Biarritz, they were happy to have me go, and I wrote all that up in there. And but the payoff was that I never got to see the medical officer. They told me about him and told me what his name was. He was from West Virginia. He was an older fellow, and didn't know where he was coming from or anything. And he must have stayed in the officer quarters because he didn't show up at the dispensary. And then I found out that he was drunk all the time at that point anyway. So that was.
All right. Now you go off to Biarritz. Now what were they doing at Biarritz?
They set up this. There were two places that they set up. We understood. I only went to the one place, and I'm not sure that the other one didn't close down when the war, because the war ended when we got to our location. And the other one was at, it's over near the beautiful resort area again, over near the Alps. Boy, I can't think of the name of the town now.
Well, it doesn't matter too much for our purposes. 'Cause this is-
But anyway, we understood that you be going to one of the two places. Well, it happened while I was sent with the group to be, and again, we rode the train, but this time they were passenger cars, but real old style cramped passenger cars. And again, there were so many of us, we wasn't placed for all of us to sit down at once, and it took us 3 days, I think, to go from where we were in Germany to,
down to
because
Biarritz,
again,
yeah.
we were sidelined for important freight going the other way or one thing or another. And when we got there, I found out that I had no idea what it was gonna be. Just said that they'd set up a school in France for fellows that had some college education and would be probably going back to school. And it was for combat, non-coms only, didn't have to be just not officers,
Right.
no commissioned officers. And that we would be able to choose from any number of different kinds of courses and one thing or another. And as I say, I think they wanted to make sure that we were somewhat conditioned for being turned loose on we were totally different than the college population when we arrived. And the same thing happened there. I think some of the teachers were not prepared for us either. I mean, they had a bunch of people that were more worldly experienced than they were in some respects, and were anxious to get 4 years behind us that had kept us from our education. I don't think they were fully prepared for all of that, except, as I say, the instructors I had were real good. They were well organized and real good, and I had good courses, but we couldn't transfer the credits when we got back, because they didn't give us final exams. They only gave us participated satisfactory, and
Right.
everything, and the colleges wouldn't accept that. So
Oh. Now how long did you stay there?
from the day before VJ Day, which was what, 6th or 7th of August?
Yeah, something like
I don't know,
that.
somewhere in there, until the last of October. I think it was 15th of October
Yeah.
or something like that, they closed the place down then, and it was only open for 6 months, but it was great. We had stayed in the Ritz-Carlton Hotel. Empress Eugenie's palace was one of our, with all the nude frescoes on the wall, was one of our classrooms, and beaches were beautiful. And townspeople didn't mix with us much. We had a couple of girls that for some reason sought us out, my particular roommates and one thing and another. And well, I think she found out that one of our roommates lived in Hollywood. And that's probably why she
Like,
sought us out. She was quite friendly, but I think she was, I got to thinking from back on it, I think she was an undercover for somebody. I think a lot of black market stuff going on, and we're right next to the Spanish border. And all of the hospital, or all of the hotel personnel, waiters and housekeepers were Basques, from some of them from Spain. But it was great. The food, they got GI food, but you wouldn't recognize it. Once the chefs got through with it, it was wonderful. We never had a fight. We never had, of all of those, well, when we started out, I think there was 1,000 of those there. I'm not remember how many there were of us, but I think we ended up with about 600 students that decided to forget their points and stay. And we never had anybody have any trouble with the local populace or anything else. We had warnings to stay out of the surf when they blew the whistle, because when we first got there, we were in a dedication ceremony that the French populace made to the sea for drowning 21 Germans. It seemed that when the Germans were there, the French forgot how to be lifeguards, and the Germans lost 21, so we went up and had a ceremony, a group of us, on the mountainside where they put up a plaque, and the French army band played a little bit. We were in on that, but and then I got a chance, as these pictures showed, one of my roommates was in a photography class, and he got beautiful army photographic equipment, and I still had my chauffeur's license, so I could commandeer a Jeep, so I got a Jeep, and we toured all the way down into Spain. Spain was actually off limits to us, because before we got there, some of the personnel setting up the university had gone into Spain to a bullfight at, I can't remember the name of the town, it's one of the smaller towns there, just over the border from France, and apparently had gotten into some trouble, and so we weren't welcome. No American troops were welcome in Spain, but we went through a gate at one of the towns on the border and had our picture taken in Spain, which was real nice.
Right.
And other than we did go out to the sports stadium. They had a sports stadium for the city there at Biarritz, and I was real amazed that they're great soccer players down there. And this little kid, about 10 or 12, he didn't have any equipment, but we had some soccer balls and some football, mostly footballs, but we had a soccer ball. Things football or soccer ball, boy, he could really kick that. He could really kick that thing. We were amazed at that. But he was about the only, other than the girl on the beach, he was about the only one that we had any contact with.
All right. We're kind of getting toward the end of hour number 3, so I think we work toward closing this out. So basically, once this finishes, you get sent back to the States and get discharged and get to go home. Now, do you just go back to college from there, or does that get interrupted, or?
Well, I was discharged on the, I get my wife discharge date and mine were almost the same. I think mine was the 3rd and hers was the 5th of December. But we had both been at Michigan State previous to this, and she had to go back for her degree and finish out her degree in laboratory as a laboratory technician. She'd already had her internship, but she had to have some courses to finish out. And I went back because I wanted to repeat some of the classes so as to get a better grade, to get better chance to get into medical school. And I had applied, when I got back then I applied to medical school in both Wayne State and Michigan. I didn't have much hope of getting in, but because of the activities I had, the Major Dryer sent a real glowing letter for me, and Captain Handler still remembered I destroyed his uniform, so his wasn't quite so glowing, but it was grudgingly approving of my activities, that I would make a good doctor or something. Anyway, that helped, because I'd have a letter from professors that had me in, and there weren't many of them left. The German professor that was there that had me couldn't remember me, but then when I was visiting with him, he looked up my records and he didn't do too well. I said, well, I got C's. He said, well, yeah. He said, but I do remember you from somewhere. I said, well, I was playing tennis on the tennis court one day, and you were playing with some other faculty members, and you later in class, you asked me if I wouldn't be a tennis partner you for some special match you had. I said, we played a tennis match together. Oh yeah, I'm outside. So fortunately, he remembered that, and he signed me a glowing letter. So that's how I got into Michigan. But yeah, my wife and I, we were in class together, but didn't really, well, she didn't know who I was, but I sure knew who she was. And she was that kind of a person you see her on campus, so you remember, yeah, I remember that girl, and she was real busy dating everybody else, and I never, but when we got back, it was real funny, we got to this, Michigan State went from, I think it was about 7,000 when we were, 7 or 8,000 when we were there, down to about 4,000 when war ended, and my group was the first group that had a chance to get back in the term because the war had ended in the summer term, and we weren't discharged yet. So we hit the fan with, overnight we were 21,000. I mean, they put up buildings, they held classes till midnight on weekends, Sundays and all. And it was and the classes were 3 or 4 times as big as, I hope you haven't experienced that, but
Not quite, no.
you know how that goes. You have to do it no matter what. And we had this group that went to an abnormal psych class that we'd signed up for. And most of the, when I was pre-med, well, you trained with the vet student, the basic vet students, and the had some classes with them, and the med techs. So she was in some of the bigger classes with me, and then she was in one lab class, but she didn't remember. So we all arrived at this big classroom with 100 or so people, and it ended up, we were right in the front row, alphabetically, they seat them alphabetically until they know who you are. Well, with 100 students, I stayed alphabetically anyway. So here's 5 of us sitting in the front row, and we each look at each other, well, I know you. We had classes before, you don't know your name, but what you know, fortunately, for some reason, I remembered most of the names, but except for one. Well, I was real confused about her. I don't know what this on the record or not, but anyway, I was real confused because in the classes before, she had sat on one side of me, and now she was sitting on the other side of me. And she answered to the name of Brown instead of Dodge. And I thought, well, I'm sure that's Shirley Dodge. I'm sure that's Shirley Dodge. And we all looked at each other. Well, I don't remember your name, but I remember being with you over there. And she did the same thing. So after the class was over, I said, well, I'm a little confused. Weren't you Shirley Dodge? I said, yeah, right. My name's Brown now. And I thought, well, there goes that. Well, it turned out she'd had a disastrous wartime marriage that only lasted a few months, and she went in the Navy to escape it. And but it was still complicated because she couldn't get a divorce, and so we had to work that through for a year or so, and finally got that straightened out, and it worked out all right. 7 kids.
And a lot of years.
Yeah, we almost made it to 60, but she died just before the 60th anniversary.
All right. Now, I guess to look back on the whole time that you wound up spending in the military, and in some ways you've actually kind of answered this question already, what sort of effect do you think that had on you? In what ways were you a different person when you came out, maybe, than when you went in? Or what do you think
It's
you
hard
learned
for
from it?
me I know a lot of people, well, it's the same with me as with anybody. I wouldn't ask anybody to go through it, but I wouldn't trade it for anything. I had quite a bit, for my age, I'd had quite a bit of varied experience before that, so my situation was a little different. And particularly combat experience, because at the hospital I worked on autopsies, and some of those kids had never seen a dead body, and so I was lucky in some ways. And of course, as I say, I'd had a chauffeur's license. I had done a lot of things that prepared me for just about anything, and I had had enough medicine and done enough at Fort Dix and seen enough so that when I did have people to actually take care of, why, you know, it was just a job. I mean, you went ahead and did it, and where's the next one, and do the best you can, and that's it. You don't worry about somebody shooting at you. That's their job. I mean, and the guys there protecting you, well, that's their job. Had it been in the South Pacific, it probably would have been different, because I know some medics some corpsmen from the Marines that had a totally different experience. But and the weather, I was geared to Michigan weather. I mean, some of the guys couldn't drive or didn't know how to do anything like that, but I mean, it was no problem for me. I didn't have anything at all. Oh no, excuse me. Do I do this on camera? Blow my nose?
That's all right.
There was one event I didn't tell you about. I put a paper in here on it. On the 13th before, better wait till I get my nose clear. On the 13th of December, before the activity had started, I was back St. Vincent and got some. I was driving by myself, and I was going back to the Lausfeld where the unit was, where the 592nd was, and it was foggy, in a real low ceiling, and it was traveling by, just outside of Schoenberg. I was traveling by, on the way to Blyhof, I was traveling by a gun emplacement that was manned by a group of artillerymen that were all black, 333rd Field Artillery. They were later massacred by the Germans, almost in that same spot, a few days later, anyway. Well, not all of them, because some of them escaped, but they weren't taking prisoners. They were taking prisoners long enough before the Germans shot them. But a plane came out of the fog at about 200 feet, a German plane, and I heard it look behind me, and I stopped the Jeep and rolled underneath it, thinking I was going to be strafed, because I was right beside this big gun, long-range artillery gun, and he didn't shoot. So then I figured, well, he's either located what he wanted and he's going to swing around and come back. I better stay here a minute and wait and see. Well, I think it was just a reconnaissance probably. And because that place got really blasted, the first volley that they sent over on the 16th. Anyway, I got back in the Jeep and I went up a couple hundred yards up the road. There was another Jeep pulled over, and there was a Red Cross girl. And I stopped and I said, girl, what are you doing here? And she said, I'm going to go see my brother. And I said, well, there's supposed to be any civilians here in this area, so this is a combat area. She said, I know that. She said, I got special permission to come. We were in Bastogne, I think it was. They were headquartered in Bastogne, and I found out that my brother's here, and they told me he's with the 422nd Infantry, and that, no, he's with, they told me that if I found the 422nd Infantry headquarters, they could tell me where he was. Well, I thought he was with the 422nd. Anyway, I said, well, you're headed in the right direction, but you got to go past the crossroads up there that's called Purple Heart Crossroads. And I said, several times a day the Germans throw a shell in there just to keep everybody on alert. I said, when you get there, now don't go straight ahead, because you're going to Blyhof, and don't where you want to go. You turn left. And I said, just after about half a mile there, you'll see some signs by the road, headquarters of 422nd and 590th Field Artillery. And I said, you go in there and ask them, and they'll tell you. She said, well, he's my twin brother, and I want to see him, and I'm going to come back and bring us a birthday cake. It's not our birthday, but I'm going to see that he gets a birthday cake when I come back. I said, well, lots of luck. And didn't ask her name, and we told the conversation was 5 minutes. She didn't particularly like me interfering with her affairs. But ever after that, I got to think, somebody else must have, I didn't dream it, somebody else must have seen that Red Cross girl. 64 years later, I'm up at, on Lopez Island talking to Connie Baseman, who's got a recorder and is taking down all the notes that I'm filling in on her father's. He was with the 590th at that time, and I didn't know him at that time, because that was the old 590th. But anyway, I said, she's going all these letters, and I said, that guy's pretty detailed. And I said, that Red Cross girl, it had to be someplace near her. And if she was looking for the 422nd, as it turned out, the people that informed her only knew that artillery was assigned to that battalion. They didn't know where they were. I mean, they thought the 422 would probably know better where they were. The headquarters were right side by side, as it turned out. Anyway, we're sitting at the table at Connie Baseman's, and she's going over these letters, and I said, you know, you've asked me about a lot of things, and I've asked you about some things. If your father wrote about that, and sometimes he did, sometimes he didn't. But I said, I met this traveling out of Schoenberg a couple of days before the Battle of the Bulge started. I said, I ran across this Red Cross girl. I said, nobody's ever said anything about her, but somebody else had to have seen her besides me. I didn't dream it, somebody else had to have seen her besides me. She got a funny look on her face, and she got up from the table, walked into her computer room, and brought it back. She had that day, she'd gotten in touch with this woman that had been featured on out of University of Illinois, had been featured as being a Red Cross girl that had been in the Battle of the Bulge.
Okay, this tape is done. Now, you had gotten in your story, you were down visiting somebody in Mississippi, and you were looking over her father's records or talking about his record.
No,
and you,
this is at Lopez Island out in Washington, not Mississippi.
oh, this is Washington, okay.
Henry, I digressed and take that part out. Anyway, probably would be better.
Well, I just restarted, so the previous story wasn't it.
Okay, so this girl had said that she was going to be there. Well, Connie went into the other room, brought back a CD, and on it was this picture of this woman dressed in Red Cross thing, and it was a fundraising thing that they had put together. So the background was some other footage that they had of World War II Red Cross wagons and one thing and another, and showed her in the foreground in her present day uniform, because she's 90, she's 3 years older than I'm 93, I think. And telling about how she went up to see her brother. It turned out her brother was a twin, and his name was Jack Pitts. And he was a very favorite with all of the troops, because the real character, their headquarters was called Pittsburgh, and he and she were twins, and his favorite story was telling everybody how their dad said when they were born that first there was Jack, and then Jill came tumbling after. And and then she goes on to tell how she was up there and located him and had a chance to visit with him, and went back to the Red Cross headquarters and baked a cake to bring back to him. Said the next day, well actually it was 2 days later anyway. 3 days later, it's the 13th, I guess. I didn't know what the dates were. I just knew that it was before the Bulge. And then the thing said that she went back up there in the Battle of the Bulge to see him and take the cake to him. And I told Connie, Basement, the girl showing me that, I said, that's not right. There's no way that anybody got on that road from Schoenberg to get up to Blythe that I didn't see, because I was up and down it 2 or 3 times during that day, but material and everything else was going both ways. Some people were moving positions, some relief troops were going up, and some people were moving back to get set up further back. And I said, there was no Red Cross people up there at that time. She couldn't have gotten there. And Kai said, well, it's, the CD says it, and I said, well, okay, but so she said, here's her phone number, give her a call. You won't believe this, but I called her, and she said, no, I don't remember anybody stopping me on it. She said, it had to be me. She said, I don't remember anybody stopping me on it. She told, Connie had told her how she happened to locate me and her together, but she said it had to be me because I was the only one that had permission. And I said at the time, well, you didn't get all the way back to your brother's, because I knew he was killed the first thing in the morning the next day. And she said, no, I didn't. She said, we got tied up. Actually, she said, I was caught in all the traffic jam and shelling and one thing and another at St. Vith. Well, actually, she said we got caught between St. Vith and Bastogne, I guess. So we ended up in Vielsalm, which was another headquarters that 106 had when the Bulge started. The day later, she said the 17th, I think, when she ended up there. And but then we visited, where are you calling from? I said, Michigan. She said, oh, she said, whereabouts in Michigan? I said, well, right now I was at the Freedom Village in retirement thing in Holland. And she said, oh, she said, well, before they said, oh, she said, I have a cottage up by Nuevo. Go there just about every summer, have had for years. And I said, well, she said, where are you right now? And I said, well, I'm in Holland. She said, well, she said, I have a friend that up until she died about a year ago was at Freedom Village. I said, well, that's where I am. So she said, well, if I get up that way this summer or any time, she said, I'll look you up. Took my phone number and address. And so of all things, this came from Connie Baseman today. I hadn't heard from her. She went to tour the battlefields, and I hadn't heard from her from that. But she called Jill Knappenberger again just to straighten out the details of our meetings. And she says there that what I said was true, that first of all, she was in a Jeep. She wasn't in the Red Cross vehicle, and she didn't get back to see her brother, but she found out he was dead, and she was stopped at a hospital in St. Vith to see him.
So you've done a good little piece of historical detective work there after all.
Yeah, it's just coincidental. I just happened to be at, Connie had run down the situation with Jack Pitts because he was a close friend of her father's. And it's even stranger because I never would have found Connie except by a real quirk of fate. By a matter of a day or so, I would have missed completely, but she got in touch with me through the 106 Association. I had already asked them to take me off their mailing list, and they hadn't gotten around to do it, and it was still in the computer, and she got a hold of me. And I wouldn't have remembered that if just a week before that, I got a letter from the CO that the 590, he was with the 591st, and then he was with the 590th. He was the battery commander of the unit I was detachment with. And he and Pitts were wonderful to me. They treated me just like a physician. As far as they were concerned, I was the only medical help they had. And they said, and Ringer kept in touch with me over all these years. And he had just written me a letter and mentioning this Jack Pitts. And she hadn't been in touch with it. She didn't know about Ringer. And when she first called me, well, I said, well, yeah, I was with your father in both the 592nd and the 590. I know him, but I said, he was an officer. I was enlisted man. I said, I don't think you're going to find anything in his letters about me, but I said, you should get in touch with Bob Ringer. So she did, and while she was working, he died then, after she'd had some communications with him. And then the more she got to go through the letters and talking to me, she realized that, you know, I was in the same area. It wasn't right with him all the time, but I was in the same area and seen him just about every day. And anyway, that's how we got acquainted. I don't know how she does a real thorough research. Everything I tell her, she goes back in the records and contacts people in Belgium and France and one thing in England. When we were in England, she gets a rundown of where all the units were and everything. She does a fantastic job. I don't think she's ever going to get end of her project because a letter a day, a letter a week for what 4 years, because he was in the service before the war too, for a short while.
All right. Well, the whole thing makes for a pretty remarkable story.
Yeah.
So
But the one you really should get, I don't know whether he's done anything about it or not, but Dr. James Yamazaki is a fantastic story. He's retired now from the chief of pediatrics of UCLA, but they sent him, after the war, they sent him to Japan to review the prognosis and studies of the children in Japan. He was a pediatrician. Children in Japan after the A bombs and his guy. But he had a fantastic story that you don't have time for it here tonight. But he was captured as a POW, and I have some. He wrote me some of that on an email. I can give you that. But there's another part of the story that's not in there, I don't think. He had a child while he was overseas. The Red Cross sent him a notice, but the Germans intercepted it, and he never got it, except by word of mouth later. The Axis Sally got it and told everybody back in the States that he was having a wonderful time as a POW. He was a doctor, and they were Japanese, and they was getting special treatment. And here he was marching him all over. Months later, he found out that he had a child. And then when he got back to the States, when he was finally released, finally located his wife. And when she came out to greet him and was with, he said, "Where's her daughter?" She had died a few weeks after and of course the Red Cross notified him, but he never got the word. But he was on the channel crossing during that storm. Somebody, not a, I don't think it was a military ship. If it was, they never identified it. Sent word to the ship he wasn't on. He was on the one that the LST that the 590th was on. Saying they understood they had a surgeon aboard. They had an emergency. Would they send him over? So they come over in this little dinghy with. He has to climb down the side of this ship and drop into the dinghy. And he's scared to death because he told me, he said, I've been in pediatrics, and he was just fresh out of school, and he said, only on-hands work I had was as a pediatrician. He said, I was listed as a surgeon. I never even visited an emergency room. He said, I didn't know what I was going to do. And when he got over there, why, they had thought the fellow had appendicitis, again, pitching season, had to climb up a rope ladder all the way to the top. Got up there and he said, I was relieved that it was anything wrong with the patient except he had a bellyache. But he said, then to get back to my ship. So the ship put him ashore in France somewhere in the middle of the night. He knocked on the first door he found, I guess, and some French couple took him in and found a ship to take him back to England, the next day, I guess. And whether that's the reason that LST went back to England or not, they picked him up somewhere along the line. He got back with a 590th. But he said he was so green. When they first assigned him at Atterbury, before they sent us over, there was a general from American headquarters somewhere came out to inspect us to make sure we were fit to go overseas or something. And he was working in the dispensary, just seeing sick people. And they, all the military brass with the general came up to inspect the dispensary, and he didn't salute or anything, just stuck out and said, "Well, hiya, General." General, of course, all the officers lived there. But they visited. He said when he found out that he wasn't supposed to do that, he said, I thought sure he was gonna get signed to the infantry, but he said, I didn't, but he said my coworker there, the one that was with the 589th had come out at the same time. I didn't know him that well, I saw him a couple times. But he said he was even worse. A contingent showed up in his dispensary and he said, have him in the waiting room, I'm busy. He got sent to the infantry. But he's 90, he's 4 years older, he's 96 now, 96 I think now. Real spry, and just a real nice guy, but he has a fantastic story to tell. And he was, in March, he almost continuously for 400 some miles as a POW.
Yep. All right. But that ultimately is going to be
But
his story.
Because he was an officer in the Japanese, I don't know whether that was it or not, because some of them didn't go much at all. But. And one time they were rescued by a special task force from Patton, and they went with the task force, and a few days later they got cut off and recaptured along with the task force. And we're in for another 3 or 4 weeks, I can't remember what they, but he has a fantastic story.
We'll look him up and see if he's in the Library of Congress collection, and if he's not, I'll suggest to them that they go find him, because that sounds like one heck of a story to get.
Yeah, I've got he wrote me what happened when he was a POW, but that's about the only part of it I have. The rest of it I got from Connie because of her dad's letters, because he was a close friend of both Yamazaki. Well, he didn't know Yamazaki that long, but Jack Pitts and he were, anyway.
All right. Well, we've had a pretty good long session here, and I'm going to close it out now. But thank you again for taking the time to talk to me here.